There is a moment that almost every woman in menopause knows intimately, a moment so ordinary it barely registers as significant, and yet it may be one of the most consequential minutes of her entire day. It is the moment she wraps her hands around that first warm cup of coffee, breathes in the deep roasted aroma, and takes that initial sip before the world fully wakes up around her. For decades, that ritual has been a source of comfort, a quiet anchor in the chaos of daily life. But what if I told you that during menopause, that very same cup of coffee is doing something to your heart that most women never suspect? Something that could either be slowly eroding your cardiovascular health or actively protecting it, depending on a few critical details that almost nobody talks about. I want you to stay with me today because this is not going to be one of those simple conversations where someone tells you coffee is bad and you should stop drinking it. That would be easy, and it would also be dangerously incomplete. The truth about coffee and your heart during menopause is far more nuanced and far more empowering than the oversimplified advice that gets passed around in waiting rooms and wellness blogs. What I am about to share with you comes from years of working with women navigating the cardiovascular changes of menopause. Women who were confused, frightened, and often given advice that made their situation worse. Let me start with something that will probably surprise you. Coffee is the single largest source of antioxidants in the Western diet. Not blueberries, not dark leafy greens, not even green tea. Coffee. That dark aromatic liquid contains an extraordinary concentration of polyphenolic compounds, chlorogenic acid, caffeic acid, ferulic acid, and dozens of other bioactive molecules that have been shown in large-scale studies to reduce inflammation in blood vessel walls, improve the function of your endothelium, which is the delicate inner lining of your arteries, and lower oxidative stress throughout your cardiovascular system. These are not minor marginal effects. We are talking about compounds that actively defend the architecture of your heart and blood vessels against the kind of damage that accelerates during menopause. And this is where the story gets complicated because menopause changes everything about how your body responds to coffee. To understand what is happening, you need to understand what estrogen has been doing for your heart for the past 3 decades. Before menopause, estrogen acts as a powerful cardiovascular guardian. It promotes vasodilation, helping your blood vessels stay flexible and open. It reduces inflammation in arterial walls. It helps regulate cholesterol by keeping your HDL elevated and your LDL in check. It even influences how your blood clots, maintaining a delicate balance. Your heart has been operating under the protection of this remarkable hormone for most of your adult life. And most women never realize how much heavy lifting estrogen has been doing behind the scenes. When estrogen begins to decline during perimenopause and drops dramatically after menopause, your cardiovascular system loses its most powerful ally. Blood vessels that were once supple begin to stiffen. The endothelial lining becomes more vulnerable to damage. Inflammatory markers start to rise. Blood pressure begins to creep upward. And this is the critical context that changes everything about how coffee affects your heart, because caffeine is, among many other things, a vasoconstrictor. It temporarily narrows blood vessels and increases vascular resistance. In a younger body with abundant estrogen keeping vessels flexible, this mild vasoconstrictive effect is easily compensated for. But in a body where estrogen's protective vasodilation is fading, that same effect lands differently. It compounds the stiffening. It amplifies the resistance. It pushes blood pressure higher in a system already trending toward hypertension. Now, before you push your coffee cup away in alarm, I need you to hear the rest of the story, because here is where the real surprise lives. That same caffeine molecule that causes temporary vasoconstriction also stimulates the production of nitric oxide in moderate doses. Nitric oxide is one of the most important vasodilators your body produces, a molecule that signals blood vessels to relax and open, improving blood flow and reducing pressure on arterial walls. In moderate amounts, caffeine actually supports this protective mechanism. The key word here is moderate, and the threshold for what constitutes moderate shifts during menopause. What your body handled effortlessly at 35 may overwhelm its compensatory systems at 52. The dose that protects can become the dose that harms, and the margin between the two narrows as estrogen declines. But timing matters even more than quantity, and this is something that I find almost nobody is talking about with the urgency it deserves. Every morning, your body goes through a remarkable hormonal event called the Cortisol Awakening Response. Within 30 to 45 minutes of opening your eyes, your adrenal glands release a surge of cortisol that mobilizes energy, sharpens alertness, and prepares you for the day. This cortisol peak is natural and necessary, rising sharply, then tapering off within an hour. During menopause, however, this system becomes dysregulated. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis loses precision as estrogen and progesterone decline, and many women in menopause carry elevated baseline cortisol levels. The cortisol awakening response still occurs, but it now spikes on top of an already elevated baseline, like adding a wave to water that is already too high. Now imagine pouring a strong cup of coffee directly into that biochemical storm. Caffeine stimulates the adrenal glands to produce even more cortisol. If you drink your coffee within that first hour of waking, during the peak of your cortisol awakening response, you are pouring fuel on a fire that is already burning too hot. Cortisol levels can spike to ranges that mimic acute stress, and the cardiovascular consequences are immediate. Blood pressure jumps, sometimes by 10 to 15 millimeters of mercury. Blood sugar spikes as cortisol mobilizes glucose from your liver. Inflammatory cytokines increase, bathing your arterial walls in the chemical signals that promote plaque formation and vascular damage. Your heart rate elevates, and if this happens every single morning, those acute spikes begin to cause vascular remodeling, a process where your arteries literally change their structure in response to chronic pressure, thickening their walls, losing their flexibility, becoming the stiff, resistant vessels that define cardiovascular disease. And there is one more detail that makes this morning pattern even more damaging. When you drink coffee on an empty stomach, there is no food to buffer the absorption of caffeine. It hits your bloodstream faster, reaches peak concentration more quickly, and produces a sharper cortisol spike than it would if you had eaten first. The protein and fat from a proper breakfast slow caffeine absorption, blunt the cortisol response, and give your body time to manage the stimulant. If you are finding this information eye-opening and want to understand more about how your personal cortisol patterns affect your health during menopause, I have put together a resource in the description below that goes deeper into this topic and can help you identify your own optimal timing for coffee and other stimulants. Let me tell you about a woman named Diane, because her story illustrates this perfectly, and it is a story I have seen repeated in countless variations. Diane was 52 when she first came to see me, a vibrant, sharp-minded woman who had been a devoted coffee lover for more than 30 years. She described her morning coffee as sacred, the one ritual she refused to negotiate on, the quiet minutes before dawn when she sat alone with her thoughts and her 2 large mugs of strong, dark roast. She had been drinking 4 to 5 cups throughout the day for as long as she could remember, and coffee had never caused her a moment of trouble. Then perimenopause arrived and everything changed. The heart palpitations started first, sudden fluttering sensations in her chest that would appear without warning and leave her breathless with anxiety. Then the morning anxiety crept in, a vague but persistent sense of dread that would settle over her before she had even gotten out of bed, intensifying after her first cup of coffee in ways she could not quite articulate. Her blood pressure, which had always been a perfect 118/76, began its slow, relentless climb, reaching 142/88 at her last checkup, a reading that alarmed her physician and prompted the advice that Diane had been dreading: Stop drinking coffee. She did. She quit completely, cold turkey, and the next 2 weeks were miserable. Crushing headaches, a brain fog so thick she could barely construct a sentence by mid-afternoon, fatigue that made her feel like she was moving through wet sand, and underneath it all, a creeping sadness, a sense of loss that felt disproportionate to giving up a beverage, but was absolutely real. And here is what made it worse. After 6 weeks without coffee, her blood pressure had barely moved. It dropped from 142/88 to 138/85, a marginal improvement that hardly justified the misery of giving up something she loved. The palpitations had decreased slightly, but had not disappeared. She felt worse overall, not better, and she was confused and frustrated and beginning to wonder if something more serious was wrong with her heart. When Diane came to my practice, we took a very different approach. Instead of asking whether she should drink coffee, we asked how she was drinking it. The picture that emerged was striking. Diane's alarm went off at 5:15 every morning. By 5:30, before eating anything, she was drinking her first large mug of strong coffee, roughly 250 milligrams of caffeine, hitting her system at the exact peak of her cortisol awakening response, on a completely empty stomach. Her second mug followed by 6:15. By the time she ate breakfast at 7, if she ate breakfast at all, she had already consumed nearly 500 milligrams of caffeine, and her cortisol levels had been driven to heights that mimicked chronic, unrelenting stress. The solution was not to eliminate coffee. It was to restructure the entire architecture of how she consumed it. We started with breakfast first, a meal containing protein and healthy fats, eaten within 30 minutes of waking. Then we waited. At 8 o'clock, roughly 90 minutes after waking and well past the peak of her cortisol awakening response, Diane had her first cup of coffee, a single normal-sized cup containing about 120 milligrams of caffeine. She was allowed a second smaller cup before noon, bringing her total daily caffeine to approximately 250 milligrams, half of what she had been consuming, and timed to work with her body's hormonal rhythms rather than against them. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 weeks, Diane's blood pressure had dropped to 122/78, healthier than it had been in 2 years. Her palpitations decreased by roughly 80%, and the ones that remained were mild, brief, and no longer frightening. The morning anxiety dissolved almost entirely once her cortisol was no longer being artificially amplified by poorly timed caffeine, and perhaps most importantly, Diane still had her coffee. She still had that warm cup in her hands, that aroma, that ritual. She told me, with tears in her eyes, that I will not soon forget, that she did not lose her coffee. She found the right way to drink it. But I want to tell you another story, because it reveals the other side of this equation, the side that is even more surprising, and that challenges the conventional wisdom even further. Margaret was 58, postmenopausal for 3 years, and she had quit coffee entirely after an episode of supraventricular tachycardia, a rapid heart rhythm that sent her to the emergency room with her heart racing at nearly 200 beats per minute. The episode resolved on its own. Her cardiologist found no structural heart disease, but Margaret was shaken to her core. She immediately eliminated coffee, switched to green tea, and committed herself to what she believed was the most heart-protective lifestyle possible. For 3 years, Margaret felt virtuous about her choice. But when she came to see me for a comprehensive cardiovascular assessment, the numbers told a very different story. Her oxidative stress markers were significantly elevated, meaning the free radical damage to her blood vessels had actually increased since she quit coffee. Her LDL cholesterol had been climbing steadily, and arterial stiffness testing showed that her blood vessels were becoming less flexible, not more, despite 3 years of what she considered heart-healthy living. Margaret was doing many things right. Her diet was reasonable, she exercised moderately, she did not smoke. But she had unknowingly removed one of the most significant sources of cardiovascular protection from her daily routine. The polyphenols she had been getting from her daily coffee, the chlorogenic acid reducing oxidative damage, the caffeic acid keeping inflammatory markers in check, the ferulic acid helping her blood vessels maintain elasticity, all of it was gone. Her green tea provided some antioxidants, but not nearly in the concentration that her coffee had delivered. We reintroduced coffee carefully, 1 cup per day, half caffeinated, to address Margaret's anxiety about caffeine and heart rhythm, timed at mid-morning after a proper breakfast. We also enriched her diet with antioxidant-rich foods, dark berries, leafy greens, dark chocolate. But I want to be honest, because the coffee itself made a measurable difference. After 4 months, Margaret's oxidative stress markers had improved significantly. Her LDL cholesterol had dropped. Her arterial stiffness measurements were moving in the right direction for the first time in years. She sat in my office looking at her lab results with stunned disbelief, and she said something that has stayed with me. I spent 3 years being afraid of something that was actually helping me. Margaret's story is not unusual. It reflects a broader pattern where women eliminate coffee out of fear, lose its protective benefits, and see their cardiovascular markers worsen. The tragedy is not that they quit coffee. The tragedy is that nobody helped them understand the difference between the caffeine and the coffee, between the timing that harms and the timing that heals. And this brings me to something crucial for every woman in menopause to understand about heart palpitations, because this is one of the most common reasons women give up coffee, and it is often based on a misunderstanding. During perimenopause and menopause, fluctuating estrogen levels directly affect the electrical conduction system of the heart. Estrogen influences ion channels in cardiac cells and helps regulate the autonomic nervous system that controls heart rhythm. When estrogen fluctuates wildly or drops precipitously, palpitations, skipped beats, and episodes of rapid heart rate become remarkably common. These are hormonal palpitations, and they would occur whether or not a woman ever touched a cup of coffee. But because palpitations often happen in the morning, when coffee is being consumed, women make a logical but often incorrect connection. They feel their heart flutter after their morning cup, assume the coffee caused it, and eliminate it entirely. In many cases, what they are feeling is the combined effect of their cortisol awakening response and fluctuating hormones, with coffee playing a minor role at most. Large-scale studies involving hundreds of thousands of participants have consistently shown that moderate coffee consumption does not increase the risk of cardiac arrhythmias, and some have even suggested a slight protective effect. This does not mean caffeine can never trigger palpitations in sensitive individuals or those consuming excessive amounts. But the blanket advice to quit coffee because of palpitations during menopause is, in most cases, throwing out an extraordinary source of cardiovascular protection to address a symptom with a different root cause entirely. So, what does all of this mean for you practically in your daily life, starting tomorrow morning? It means that the conversation about coffee and your heart during menopause is not a yes or no question. It is a how, when, and how much question. Allow your body to complete its cortisol awakening response before introducing caffeine. Wait at least 90 minutes after waking. Always eat before you drink your coffee, a breakfast containing protein and healthy fat that will slow caffeine absorption and buffer the cortisol response. Keep your total daily caffeine moderate, roughly 200 to 300 milligrams, which translates to about 2 to 3 cups of brewed coffee. Make your last caffeinated cup before 1 in the afternoon, because caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours and can disrupt the sleep your cardiovascular system needs for repair. And if you love the ritual but want to reduce caffeine further, know that decaffeinated coffee retains the vast majority of its polyphenolic compounds and antioxidant power, with almost none of the stimulant effects. If you would like a complete guide to supporting your cardiovascular health through menopause, including specific foods, timing strategies, and lifestyle adjustments that make the most difference, I have linked a comprehensive resource in the description below designed specifically for women navigating this transition. What I want you to carry away from this conversation is not a set of rigid rules, but a deeper understanding of your body during this chapter of life. Menopause is not a disease and it is not a decline. It is a profound hormonal recalibration, and it demands a more nuanced approach to the things you put into your body and the timing with which you put them there. Coffee is not your enemy. Ignorance about how coffee interacts with your changing physiology, that is the real threat. And now you have the knowledge to transform a potential risk into a genuine source of protection. Diane found her way back to her morning ritual with a healthier heart than she had had in years. Margaret discovered that the thing she had been running from was the very thing her heart had been missing. And you, right now, have the understanding to make choices about coffee that honor both your love of it and the new needs of your body. If this conversation changed the way you think about something as simple and sacred as your morning cup, I want to ask you to share it with another woman who might need to hear it. There are millions of women in menopause right now being given incomplete advice, giving up something they love out of fear, or drinking their coffee in a pattern that is silently undermining their heart health. A single share could change that for someone you care about. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I would love for you to join this community because we explore these kinds of deeply researched health topics every week, always with the goal of giving you not just answers, but understanding. Thank you for being here today, and I will see you in the next one.